She spent her life believing she had simply been forgotten. A dishwasher in an upscale restaurant, scarred by a past that left deep marks. But one accident, a lost wallet with a baby photo tucked inside, changes everything. A stranger, a millionaire, had been searching for her all his life. Ellie Norton had learned early on that life never handed you kindness. At 24, her hands were already cracked and rough from years of scrubbing dishes in restaurants that smelled like luxury she would never taste. Tonight was no different. The clatter of champagne glasses, the low hum of elegant laughter, the faint music pulsing through the marbled floors of Vintner's Crown, the finest dining establishment in the city. And there she was, elbow-deep in greasy water, invisible, forgettable, surviving. The night dragged like an anchor around her ankles. Her mind wandered, as it often did, to the empty spaces in her memory. Questions with no answers. A face she could never quite recall. A mother she never knew. A father she had stopped imagining years ago. She had just finished stacking trays when she noticed it, a sleek, black leather wallet left on the edge of the back counter, near the exit to the kitchen. No one else seemed to have spotted it. Ellie wiped her wet hands on her apron and picked it up. It was heavy, well-made, the kind that didn't belong to someone who counted their pennies. She hesitated. Protocol said to hand it in immediately. But something, a tremor of impulse, made her thumb the edge open just a little. Credit cards. An elegant business card, Harold Berkeley, embossed in gold. She knew the name. Everyone did. Real estate tycoon. Philanthropist. Untouchable. She was about to snap it shut when something thin and worn slipped loose from a side pocket. A photograph. Ellie froze. It was old, curled at the edges from years of wear, and in it, a baby, no more than a year old, stared wide-eyed at the camera, a tiny fist in her mouth, a familiar tiny birthmark near her right eyebrow. Ellie staggered back a step, heart thundering so loud she thought the whole kitchen could hear it. She knew that face. She was that face. Her knees almost buckled. The kitchen noises faded into a hollow roar. The world spun around her, untethered. She clutched the wallet and photo tighter, feeling like she had slipped through some invisible crack in reality. What was her baby picture doing inside a millionaire's wallet? Questions flooded in, each one heavier than the last. Was it a mistake? A coincidence? Was she crazy? Dreaming? No, the birthmark, the soft curls, even the tiny scar near her temple, it was her. It was her. Ellie shoved the wallet deep into her apron pocket, her hands trembling violently now. She needed air. She needed answers. She needed to think. She bolted for the alley behind the restaurant, gulping in the freezing night air like a drowning woman. The photograph fluttered in her hand, mocking her with a truth she wasn't ready to face. This photo was supposed to stay buried in the past. But now it was here, alive in her hands. And nothing would ever be the same again. Ellie sat on the cold curb behind the restaurant, the night pressing in around her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The photograph trembled in her hand under the dim alley light. She stared at it until her vision blurred, until the baby's round face seemed almost to smirk at her confusion. What? Why would a man like Harold Berkeley, a name that belonged on magazine covers and towering office buildings, carry her baby picture in his wallet? Ellie's stomach twisted into knots. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe she had finally snapped. Too many double shifts, too many nights without sleep, too much loneliness clawing at her mind. But she knew better. She knew the truth when it stared her straight in the face. That photo wasn't a coincidence. It was a thread, a thin, fraying thread connecting her to a life she had never known. Her thoughts slipped backward, unbidden, through the dusty corridors of memory. The orphanage smelled like bleach and boiled cabbage. The walls were yellowed with age and hopelessness. She could still hear the sharp clack of Sister Marlene's shoes against the linoleum floors, the bored voices calling out names that never meant anything. She had spent her childhood there, shifting from one group home to another, shuffled like a pawn no one wanted to claim. Foster homes were no better. Faces blurred together, stern women with hollow eyes, men who barely acknowledged her existence. Some were cruel. Most were indifferent. None were family. Ellie had learned early that she belonged to no one. So how could this man, this rich stranger, possibly have her picture? Why carry it for years, hidden in a wallet he probably replaced every few months like a set of designer shoes? A sick feeling settled in her gut. Maybe he was part of something worse. Maybe he knew more about where she came from, things she had been better off not knowing. Was he someone who had once owned her? Had he bought her, abandoned her, lost her like a piece of forgotten property? The thought made her shudder violently. Or, and this was even more terrifying, what if he was someone who cared? Ellie pressed the photo to her chest, feeling the paper crinkle against her thundering heart. Her mind spun with impossible theories, each darker than the last. Anger flared, burning through the fear. No one had ever cared before. Not really. Why would it start now? She thought about storming back into the restaurant, throwing the wallet at Harold Berkeley's feet, demanding answers. But what if the truth was worse than the questions? A small, broken voice inside her whispered the thought she didn't want to hear. What if everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie? Ellie squeezed her eyes shut, but there was no escape from it now. Ellie didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Instead, she stayed hidden in the shadows across the street, watching the restaurant's glowing windows. Her uniform was soaked through with sweat and dishwater, but she didn't feel the cold. All she could feel was the photograph burning a hole in her pocket, and the unbearable weight of questions stacking higher and higher inside her chest. When Harold Berkeley finally emerged, he didn't look like the untouchable mogul from the glossy magazines. He looked tired. His shoulders sagged under the weight of an invisible burden. He moved slowly, almost like an old man despite his polished suit and expensive shoes. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Without thinking, without planning, she fell into step behind him, keeping to the pools of darkness along the sidewalk. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. She had no business following a man like Harold. She had no weapon, no plan, no armor except the raw, aching need for answers. He turned the corner and she followed, closer now, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Harold paused outside a sleek black town car, speaking in low tones to a woman in a crisp navy dress. His assistant, maybe. Ellie crept closer, staying behind a pillar, holding her breath. She strained to hear. "I thought tonight might be different," Harold was saying, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Every time I walk into a crowded room, I wonder if she's there. If I'll just, no. But it's been too many years." The woman murmured something Ellie couldn't catch. "I lost her," Harold said, voice cracking. "I lost my daughter. And I never found her." Ellie's knees buckled. She pressed a hand against the cold stone wall to steady herself, the world tilting violently around her. Daughter. The word hung in the air like a ghost. A roar built in her ears, anger, terror, disbelief. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear the photograph into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to grab Harold by the lapels and shake the truth out of him. How dare he speak of loss? How dare he talk about searching, about sorrow, when she had spent her entire childhood forgotten, abandoned, surviving scraps of affection in places no child should ever know? Where had he been when she needed him? Where had he been during the nights she cried herself to sleep, wishing for a father who never came? But beneath the rage, something smaller stirred, a flicker she hadn't felt in years. A treacherous hope. Could it be real? Could it be him? Her fists clenched so tightly around the fabric of her apron that her knuckles turned white. Her mind screamed, "Run. Run now." But her feet refused to move. Some deep aching part of her, the part that had never stopped wondering, whispered something different. Stay. Stay and find out. Ellie didn't sleep. She couldn't. Instead, she turned her tiny apartment inside out, searching for pieces of a past she had spent years trying to forget. Old files, faded documents, scraps of memory, anything that could tell her who she was, and whether Harold Berkeley's broken confession was somehow tied to her. By dawn, she sat hunched over a cluttered table, her hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. She opened the old laptop she barely used anymore and began searching. Missing children, lost heirs, adoption scandals. Story after story of desperation poured across the screen, wealthy families losing infants, legal systems too broken or too cruel to reunite them. And there, tucked away in an article from almost 3 decades ago, she found it. Prominent entrepreneur's infant daughter presumed kidnapped, no leads after months of search. Her heart stopped. The photo was blurry, faded, but it was a baby clutching a stuffed bear. The bear was gone now. The baby had grown up, forgotten. Ellie pressed trembling fingers against the image. The name in the article matched the wallet. Harold Berkeley. The missing infant's name, Ella Rose Berkeley. Her real name. A sour, burning taste filled her mouth. So it was true. The man she had followed through the dark streets wasn't a predator or a mistake. He was the beginning of a story she had been robbed of before she even learned how to speak. Her mind dragged her, unwilling, back into memory. A rainy afternoon. The orphanage smelled of mildew and bleach. A woman with no kindness in her eyes stood at the front door, holding Ellie's tiny suitcase in one hand. Sister Marlene's voice was harsh. "You'll go with them now." No explanation. No farewell. Just a shove toward strangers who spoke in clipped, tired voices and didn't look at her once during the drive to the foster house. Ellie hadn't known then that she was being erased, ripped away from her identity, her history, her blood. She was just a child. They told her nothing. They gave her nothing. And now, years later, here she sat in a peeling chair, clutching a piece of truth so sharp it cut her palms. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let the grief come. Because grief was part of the truth too. The photo wasn't a mistake. The man wasn't a coincidence. She had spent a lifetime believing she was abandoned, unworthy, disposable. And all along, a father had been out there, searching, hurting, never knowing he had failed because the world had ripped her away before she ever had a chance to be found. Ellie closed her eyes and whispered into the silence. "I was never unwanted. I was just lost." The truth hurt like fire. But fire could purify. And for the first time, Ellie saw a path through the ashes. It took everything Ellie had left in her to walk through the polished glass doors of the building Harold Berkeley called his second home. The receptionist looked at her like she didn't belong, and she didn't, but Ellie didn't waver. Not this time. "I need to speak to Mr. Berkeley," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's about family." A few phone calls. A few skeptical glances. And then, miraculously, she was ushered into a private elevator that hummed silently as it climbed higher and higher. By the time the doors opened, Ellie's knees felt like water. Harold was standing at the far end of a large, warm office, staring out a wall of windows at the gray city sprawling below. He turned when she entered, and for a long, agonizing moment, neither of them spoke. Ellie pulled the photograph from her pocket and held it out like a shield. "I found this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "In your wallet." Harold's eyes widened. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, snatching the photo from her hand with shaking fingers. His breath caught in his throat. Where did you get this?" His voice cracked. "You left your wallet," Ellie said. I had to know." The photo trembled between them. Tears welled in Harold's eyes, blurring the sharp lines of his face. He stumbled backward, fumbling with a drawer behind his desk, pulling out a battered leather folder. He laid it on the desk between them and opened it with trembling hands. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age. Each one addressed to orphanages, child services, private investigators. Each one a desperate, pleading cry from a father searching for the child he had lost. "I never stopped looking," Harold said hoarsely. "They told me you were gone. That. Kidnapped without a trace." Ellie couldn't breathe. One letter caught her eye, a dated envelope from the year she turned 5. It was addressed to the same cold, crumbling institution she had been dragged away from without explanation. "We were so close," Harold whispered. "And I didn't even know." Ellie's legs gave out and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The pain was too big, too sharp. It poured out of her in great, racking sobs. Harold knelt in front of her like a penitent, his own tears falling unchecked. "I never wanted to leave you," he said. "I never gave up." It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't neat or pretty. It was 2 broken hearts recognizing each other across years of silence and betrayal. Ellie let herself cry, for the girl she had been, for the father she had needed, for all the empty birthdays and lonely nights. They had lost a lifetime. But now, standing on the edge of something raw and real, she had to decide. Could they start again? Could 2 strangers build a bridge over a chasm carved by years? Ellie stood at the edge of something she couldn't name. A cliff, a doorway, a battlefield. Part of her wanted to step forward, to believe that Harold's trembling hands and tear-filled eyes were real. That this pain wasn't another lie waiting to collapse around her. But another part, the part shaped by years of betrayal and cold shoulders, screamed at her to run. She spent the next days drifting through her shifts at the restaurant like a ghost. Every clatter of dishes, every shouted order, every glare from a manager barely registered. Her mind was stuck on that office, those letters, the way Harold had knelt as if she were something precious he didn't dare touch. Was it possible? Could someone really have spent a lifetime trying to find her? Doubt clung to her like smoke. She had trusted before, and been burned. Foster parents who promised forever, then disappeared when checks stopped coming. Friends who swore loyalty, then abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. Wasn't it safer to stay cold, stay untouched? And yet, small cracks kept forming in her armor. Harold didn't push. He didn't send flowers or show up uninvited. He sent one simple text each morning. "Good morning, Ellie. I'm thinking of you. And each night. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe." No demands. No guilt. Just presence. It unsettled her more than if he had tried to buy her affection. One rainy afternoon, Ellie sat curled on her worn couch, staring at an old scar on her knee, a memory from when she was 7 and fell off a swing set no one had bothered to fix. She remembered crying, bleeding, limping back inside, and being told to toughen up because no one has time for crybabies. But Harold's face, when he had looked at that photo of her, it had been full of grief, full of the pain of lost years. He had cared even when he thought he would never see her again. It wasn't a memory. It was real, happening now. And that was different. Bit by bit, the wall inside her cracked. Not all at once. Not in some grand, cinematic moment. It was in the way she saved his messages instead of deleting them. In the way she found herself wondering what it would feel like to hear him call her by her real name, Alla. In the way hope, thin, battered, barely breathing, began to flicker in the hollow spaces of her heart. Ellie didn't know if trust was something you built or something you leapt toward. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But she knew this. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Some wounds never healed. But sometimes something stronger grew in their place, something fierce and stubborn and new. Maybe she was ready to find out. The morning was cool and gray, the kind that made the world feel suspended between past and future. Ellie stood outside the small cafe where Harold had suggested they meet. Neutral ground, no expectations, no pressure. She almost didn't come. Twice she had walked past the door, heart hammering, fists clenched in her coat pockets. But something deeper than fear pulled her back. A need, raw and wordless. When she finally stepped inside, she spotted him at a corner table. A plain black jacket, a coffee cooling untouched before him, eyes scanning every face with a quiet kind of hope that almost broke her. Their eyes met. He didn't jump up. He didn't rush over. He just smiled, small, shaky, real, and waited. Ellie crossed the room slowly, feeling the weight of every step. When she sat down across from him, neither of them spoke for a long while. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick with everything they didn't have to say. Finally, Harold cleared his throat, voice rough. "I don't expect anything. I'm glad you're here." Ellie swallowed hard, the lump in her throat almost too much to bear. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, voice hoarse. "I don't even know if I can." "You don't have to," Harold said. "We can figure it out. Or not. No pressure. Just stay a little while." The offer was so simple. So achingly different from the grasping, demanding love she had known before. Ellie looked down at her chipped nail polish, at the calluses on her fingers, the story of a life fought for inch by inch. And then she looked up, into the face of a man who had spent years trying to find a child he had barely known, refusing to give up even when the world said it was hopeless. Maybe broken people didn't need perfect endings. Maybe they just needed each other. She gave a small nod, barely more than a breath. "Okay," she whispered. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. A loosening, a letting go. They didn't talk much that first morning. They shared a quiet breakfast, two people carrying heavy pasts, finding a way to sit side by side without crushing each other under the weight of everything unsaid. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't clean or easy or perfect. But it was real. It was the beginning of something fragile and fierce, stitched together out of loss and stubborn, impossible hope. As they left the cafe hours later, the sun finally broke through the clouds, warm and tentative. Harold offered his hand, not pushing, just waiting. Ellie hesitated, then slowly she slipped her fingers into his. And for the first time in a long, long time she let herself believe. Because sometimes the greatest losses don't break us. Sometimes they become the greatest gifts we never saw coming.